laughter in the Redemption Falls saloon died the moment Nathan Cross stood up from the corner table and spoke words that made every man in the room turn and stare. "I'll take the hand." The smoky air hung suspended between heartbeats. The trembling woman standing beside the drifter looked at Nathan like she couldn't decide if he'd just saved her life or made it infinitely worse. Men whispered that Nathan had finally cracked after 7 years, alone on that mountain. Others shook their heads and said he'd just won himself the most worthless prize in the Wyoming territory. Nathan didn't care what they said. Something in the woman's eyes had stopped him cold. The look of someone waiting to see if the world would show mercy or deliver one more crushing blow. Her wrists bore rope marks. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and the way she held herself, shoulders pulled inward like she was trying to disappear, made Nathan's chest tighten with an anger he hadn't felt since the day he'd buried his wife. 3 days earlier, Nathan had stood at the edge of his homestead, staring at land that had broken him year after year. The stubborn Wyoming soil gave just enough to survive, never enough to truly live. Behind the cabin stood 2 graves, Margaret and the infant son he'd never gotten to hold, both taken by fever in the same terrible week 7 winters past. Every Sunday he talked to those graves, trying to keep going, trying to believe his life still held meaning beyond mere survival. But lately, the words had stopped coming. Lately, he'd just stood there in silence, wondering if a man could die of loneliness while his heart still beat. That night at the saloon, all Nathan wanted was one quiet drink before riding back up the mountain to his empty cabin. But then Dixon, a rough drifter with dead eyes and a reputation for cruelty, ran out of money at the poker table. With the whole room watching, he said, "I've still got something to wager. A woman outside in my wagon." The room went cold. Even on the rough frontier, trading people like livestock crossed lines that most men wouldn't. But Marcus Brennan, the richest rancher in the territory, and a man who thought his money made him untouchable, just leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Bring her in." When Dixon dragged her inside, the saloon erupted in whispers. The woman looked like a ghost, dirt smeared across her face, dress torn and stained, wrists loosely bound with rope that had rubbed her skin raw. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, as if she'd already learned that no one in rooms like this would help her. Brennan studied her the way a man examines a horse's teeth before buying. "Not worth much," he said. "Fold your hand, Dixon." But Dixon wasn't backing down. "Someone here wants her. Someone's got use for her." No one moved. No one spoke. The woman's shoulders tightened, pulling inward, making herself smaller, waiting for the world to decide her fate like she'd done 100 times before. Nathan felt something rise in him, a quiet rage he hadn't experienced in years. That woman didn't belong to any of them. She shouldn't be standing there like property to be won or lost. Before he could think better of it, before common sense could stop him, he heard his own voice cut through the silence. "I'll take the hand." The room exploded. Some men laughed outright. Others cursed or shook their heads in disbelief. Brennan raised an eyebrow, amused by the spectacle. "Cross, that's the worst bargain you'll ever make." Nathan ignored them all. The cards were dealt. Dixon was desperate, sloppy, betting recklessly on a pair of 8s. Nathan played carefully, methodically, and when the final cards hit the table, His 3 jacks beat Dixon's hand decisively. Just like that, the room declared Nathan a fool. But the woman finally lifted her eyes to his, and in that brief moment of connection, Nathan saw something that made his decision worthwhile. Not just fear, but a flicker of something else. Hope, maybe. Or just the faint possibility that not everyone in the world wanted to hurt her. Nathan walked to Dixon. "Give me the rope." Dixon jerked it loose with rough hands, took Nathan's money, and stormed out, already hunting for another bottle. The crowd lost interest quickly. To them, the show was over. Nathan was left standing with the woman everyone claimed wasn't worth a penny. "What's your name?" he asked gently. A long pause. When she finally spoke, her voice came out weak, strained by fear and months of silence. "Catherine." "I'm Nathan Cross," he said. "I have a homestead up in the mountains. It's simple, but you'll be safe there. That's all I can promise." She didn't answer, didn't trust him. He could see that clearly. But she didn't run either. And for now, that was enough. Outside, the Wyoming night bit cold. Nathan took off his coat and draped it around Catherine's shoulders. She stiffened at first, as if expecting pain instead of kindness, but she didn't pull away. He lifted her onto his horse with careful hands, then climbed up behind her, holding the reins while she sat rigid and uncertain. They rode under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Wind cut through the valley, but Nathan kept the horse steady, unhurried. After a while, Catherine's breathing eased slightly. Her exhaustion finally overwhelmed her fear, and her body sagged back against him, seeking warmth, even as her mind still cataloged every potential threat. If you're drawn to stories where one act of courage changes 2 lives forever, where the woman everyone called worthless reveals gifts no one could see, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. These tales of frontier redemption and unexpected blessings don't tell themselves, and your support keeps them coming. Now back to the mountain, where Nathan is about to discover that saving Catherine's life was only the beginning. When they reached the cabin, Nathan lit a lamp and opened the small bedroom door. "You can sleep here," he said softly. "The bed's warm. I'll be out here if you need anything. No harm will come to you under my roof. You have my word." Catherine stepped inside slowly, as if she wasn't certain she had permission to occupy space. Her eyes swept the room, the small fireplace, the handmade quilt Margaret had stitched years ago, the simple chair by the window. She turned back toward Nathan. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. Nathan swallowed hard. "Because it was the right thing to do." She studied him for a long moment, searching for deception or hidden motives. Finding none, she nodded once and closed the door. Nathan sat at the kitchen table long after he heard her breathing even out in sleep. He stared at the dark mountains beyond his window and wondered what he'd just brought into his life. He didn't know her story, didn't know her fears or her past, didn't know if she'd stay or if she even trusted him enough to try. But when dawn broke and he glanced through the window, something stopped him cold. Catherine was outside, kneeling in the frost-touched soil, her hands moving through the earth with a tenderness that suggested she understood it in ways Nathan never had. And in that moment, everything in his world began to shift. The frost still clung to the ground when Nathan stepped outside, uncertain what he was witnessing. Catherine knelt in the cold soil, her dress damp at the hem, her hands sifting earth with a focus so intense it startled him. She didn't look afraid anymore, didn't look beaten. She looked alive. "Catherine," he said gently. She looked up, and in the morning light her eyes seemed different, clear, alert, almost hungry for something she hadn't felt in months. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I should have asked permission." "Permission for what?" Nathan asked. She hesitated, and then gestured at the dirt around her. "To examine your soil." Nathan blinked. Soil? Of all the things he'd expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. "It's too alkaline," she said slowly at first, testing her voice, then with growing confidence. "That's why your crops struggle. The drainage is poor, and you're getting mineral lockout. But the clay content is good, and the underlying structure is better than it looks. You have potential here, Nathan. You're just planting the wrong things in the wrong way." Nathan stared. Nobody in the territory talked like that. Not even farmers who'd been working land their whole lives. "How do you know all that?" he asked. For the first time since he'd met her, Catherine lifted her chin without fear. "My father was Professor William Hartwell, a botanist. He studied frontier agriculture for 20 years. I traveled with him everywhere, from the Dakotas to Oregon. He taught me everything: soil chemistry, companion planting, seed preservation, water management. It was our entire life." Her voice cracked on the last words. "He died 6 months ago. After that, I had no one. No family, no money, no protection. That's when—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence that would explain how a professor's daughter had ended up bound with rope in a drifter's wagon. Nathan felt something twist in his chest. She'd been dragged through hell, treated as property, her knowledge dismissed or ignored. But now, standing in the morning frost with dirt on her hands, she looked like someone remembering who she used to be. Catherine reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were seeds, strange varieties Nathan had never seen, carefully wrapped and labeled in tiny handwriting. "My father's collection," she said softly. "Hardy varieties he gathered from across the continent. They can grow where others fail. If you let me, I can plant them. I can help you change this land." Nathan didn't hesitate. "It's your home now. You don't need permission." Something in Catherine's face softened for the first time. Not fully. Trust would take time, but enough that Nathan saw the woman she'd been before the world had broken her. They spent the morning planting in patterns Nathan had never seen. Instead of straight rows, Catherine created circular beds. She placed certain seeds together, explaining how some plants protected others from pests, how some pulled nitrogen from air into soil, how others provided shade that kept moisture from evaporating. Nathan followed her instructions without question, watching the quiet fire return to her eyes as she worked. Her hands moved with practiced certainty, placing each seed at precise depths, spacing them according to measurements she seemed to carry in her head. By midday, 3 large beds were planted, each one a careful pattern of complementary species. "How long before anything grows?" Nathan asked. "A week if the weather holds," Catherine said. "And by harvest, you won't recognize this place." For the first time in 7 years, Nathan felt something he hadn't dared feel before: hope. That afternoon, Nathan saddled his horse and rode to town. Catherine stayed behind, still working the soil like someone trying to breathe again after months underwater. Nathan needed to get her proper clothes, supplies, things that would make the cabin feel less like a prison and more like a home. When he entered the general store, Mrs. Patterson behind the counter nearly dropped her spectacles. "Nathan Cross," she said, "is it true you won a woman in a card game?" Nathan felt heat climb his neck. "I helped someone who needed help." Mrs. Patterson studied him for a long moment, then her face softened. "You're a good man, Nathan. But folks are talking. If that girl needs women's things, clothes, supplies, help, you send her to me. No woman should be alone up there." Nathan nodded gratefully, purchased what he could afford, and rode back as the sun began its descent. When he returned to the homestead that evening, Catherine was still in the field, dirt covering her hands and forearms, sweat on her brow despite the cool air, but standing with a quiet pride he'd never seen before. She looked more like herself, whoever she truly was beneath the trauma. "I brought you some things," Nathan said. Catherine's hands shook slightly when she opened the packages. Simple dresses, boots that actually fit, a warm shawl. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," Nathan said. "I did." That night they shared stew at the small table. Catherine ate slowly at first, then with growing hunger. Between bites, she told him about her father's journals, the methods he'd developed, the dream he'd had of creating a guide that settlers could use to survive harsh land. "Maybe," Nathan said softly, "you could finish his work. Here. Safely." Catherine's eyes widened. "You would let me?" "It's your home," he said. "Do whatever you need." For the first time she smiled. Small, fragile, but real. And the cabin, which had felt empty for 7 long years, seemed to warm around them. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. 3 weeks later, a rider thundered toward the homestead. It was Samuel Porter from the settlement, and he swung off his horse, breathing hard. "Nathan, Catherine, you need to know. Marcus Brennan's been asking questions. He learned who Catherine's father was, found out about her knowledge. He's spreading rumors, saying she was stolen from him, that he has legal claim. He wants her to work for him, manage his operations, and Brennan doesn't take no for an answer." Catherine's face drained of color. Nathan stepped between her and Porter instinctively. "He's not taking her." Porter swallowed hard. "He's got influence, Nathan. Money, connections. He's talking to territorial officials. You two need to be careful." After Porter rode away, Catherine sat trembling at the table. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Men like Brennan never stop." Nathan knelt beside her chair. "You're safe here. I'll protect you. Whatever it takes." But even as he said the words, the truth settled heavy in his chest. A storm was coming, and Marcus Brennan held most of the cards. The storm arrived faster than either expected. 2 weeks later, while Nathan and Catherine were selling produce in Redemption Falls, vegetables grown from her father's seeds that were larger and healthier than anything the settlement had seen, the entire town went silent. A coach rolled in carrying Territorial Judge Calloway. Beside him, wearing fine clothes and a smile that hid knives, sat Marcus Brennan. People stepped back as the judge entered the meeting hall. Nathan and Catherine followed, hearts pounding. The air felt thick enough to choke on. "Mr. and Mrs. Cross," Judge Calloway said, studying papers on the table before him.
A legal matter has been brought concerning your marriage and Mrs. Cross's status. Nathan stood straight. Our marriage is legal. We have nothing to answer for. Brennan rose with the documents in hand, his voice dripping false concern. Your Honor, I present notarized proof that the woman known as Catherine Cross was legally contracted to me before the poker game in which Nathan Cross acquired her. Dixon violated that contract. What Mr. Cross won was already mine by law. Gasps filled the room. Catherine shook her head, her voice trembling but strong. That never happened. He forged those papers. Brennan shrugged elegantly. I have notarized signatures and witnesses prepared to testify. Judge Calloway studied the documents with a troubled expression. These appear legitimate. Catherine's knees weakened. Nathan caught her before she fell, his arm around her waist. She's my wife. You can't take her. Brennan's voice carried false sympathy throughout the hall. I'm only requesting protective custody until a full hearing can be conducted in the territorial capital. Surely that's reasonable. Protective custody means you take me, Catherine said, her fear transforming into fury. Force me to work for you. Turn my knowledge into your profit. You're trying to turn me into property again. Mrs. Patterson stood suddenly. Judge, this is wrong. Catherine Cross is no man's property. She belongs to this community. One by one, people rose. Samuel Porter, the schoolteacher. Farmers, Catherine had advised. Their voices filled the room, but Judge Calloway still shook his head. A full hearing in 30 days, he declared. Until then, the situation remains under review. Brennan smiled, because he knew the next 30 days were his battlefield, and he played for keeps. At home that night, Catherine trembled in Nathan's arms. He'll take me. He'll find a way. No, Nathan said firmly. I'll die before I let that happen. She looked up at him, tears shining. Then we have to fight. We need proof. Real proof. Nathan nodded, jaw tight. I'll find it. The next morning, he rode down the mountain with grim determination. For days he questioned people, searched for cracks in Brennan's story, tried to find anyone willing to testify against a man with that much power and money. Then Nathan made a dangerous decision. Late one night, he snuck onto Brennan's ranch property, moving through shadows like the hunter he'd been before grief had hollowed him out. Inside Brennan's office, by thin moonlight filtered through expensive curtains, Nathan found ledgers detailing bribes paid to officials, letters showing how Brennan pressured families into signing away land rights, notes about Catherine specifically, her value, how to legally claim her, plans to use her knowledge to dominate the territory's agriculture. Nathan photographed everything with a small camera, borrowed from the settlement's newspaper editor. But just as he reached the window to escape, Brennan's hired men burst through the door. Nathan fought like a wolf in a trap. He took down 2 men with savage efficiency born of desperation, but the third caught him across the ribs with a club. Pain exploded through his chest. He crashed through the window in a shower of glass, rolled, somehow found his horse, and fled into darkness with bullets singing past his head. He reached the homestead at dawn, bloody and barely conscious, slumping from his horse. Catherine ran to him, screaming his name, her hands shaking as she pulled him inside, her knowledge of healing herbs suddenly vital. "Nathan, what did you do?" she cried, pressing cloth against the gash on his head. "Got proof," he gasped.
Real proof. That afternoon, 6 armed men, Brennan's hired hands, took positions on the distant ridge, watching the homestead like wolves studying prey. But they weren't the only ones coming. By sunset, Mrs. Patterson arrived with a wagon full of women from the settlement. Behind her came Samuel Porter and a line of farmers carrying rifles. By nightfall, the homestead was surrounded. Not by enemies, but by friends. By people Catherine had helped with her knowledge. "We're not letting Brennan take either of you," Mrs. Patterson declared. 5 days before the hearing, Federal Marshal Clayton arrived. A tall, weathered man with hard eyes and a reputation for honesty. He studied Nathan's photographs and Brennan's forged papers with growing anger. He questioned witnesses. He had a handwriting expert from the territorial capital examine the documents. "These are forgeries," the expert confirmed. "Clumsy ones, actually. Different ink, inconsistent pressure, signatures that don't match known samples." Marshal Clayton nodded grimly. "Brennan isn't just coming after you. He's been running this scheme for years. We've had complaints we couldn't prove, until now." A new fire lit in Catherine's eyes. "So what happens now?" "We let him walk into that hearing," Clayton said, "thinking he's won. And then we arrest him in front of everyone." The courthouse was packed on the day of the hearing. Brennan strutted in, confident, smiling at Catherine like he already owned her future. 5 minutes later, his smile died. Marshal Clayton stood. "Your Honor, we present evidence of widespread fraud, forgery, land theft, and conspiracy committed by Marcus Brennan." Brennan's face went white, then red. "This is an outrage. Those are lies." "The handwriting analysis doesn't lie," Clayton said coldly. "Neither do your ledgers." Brennan lunged toward Catherine in final desperate rage. "You should have been mine. You will not defy me." He drew a pistol hidden in his coat. Nathan moved without thinking, putting himself between Catherine and the gun. The shot echoed through the courthouse like thunder. Nathan staggered, blood spreading across his shoulder. But he stayed on his feet long enough to see deputies swarm Brennan and slam him to the floor. Catherine caught Nathan as he fell, her scream cutting through the chaos. She pressed her hands against the wound, tears streaming down her face. "You protected me. You always protect me." "Always," Nathan breathed, before darkness took him. Nathan survived. The bullet had gone clean through, missing anything vital by inches. Catherine nursed him with the same focused intensity she'd shown with the soil, using herbs her father had taught her about, staying by his side for 3 days until the fever broke. Brennan did not fare as well. The evidence was overwhelming. He spent the next decade behind bars, his empire dismantled, his stolen land returned to the families he'd victimized. Catherine and Nathan returned home to their mountain with a peace so deep it felt like a second sunrise. The homestead bloomed under Catherine's care. Vegetables grew twice as large as anyone else's. Fruit trees that should have taken years to bear fruit did so in half the time. And settlers began making the journey up the mountain to learn from the professor's daughter. That autumn, something even more miraculous happened. Catherine took Nathan's hand and placed it on her growing belly. "Our baby is strong. I can feel it." Nathan closed his eyes, tears sliding down his weathered face. 7 years of grief melted under her touch. The graves behind the cabin would always be there. He would never forget Margaret and the son he'd lost. But now, new life was growing. New hope was taking root.
One evening, as winter approached, they stood together in the field where Catherine had first touched his soil. The land that had broken Nathan year after year now flourished under her knowledge and care. Golden light stretched across mountains that had witnessed their struggle. "They laughed when I won you that night," Nathan said quietly. "Called you worthless. Said I was a fool." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand resting on the swell of their child. "I know what they called me. But you saw who I really was." Nathan wrapped his arm around her, careful and full of wonder. "You weren't my worst bargain. You were the blessing I didn't know how to pray for." Under the Wyoming stars, as wind moved gently across fields they'd built together, their future stretched out bright and certain. A new life was growing. A new legacy had begun. And the woman the world had called worthless had turned one broken mountain man into the richest soul in the territory.